And now, a passage from The New American Navy by Sir William H. White. 1. In two handsome volumes, Mr. Long, Secretary of the United States Navy from 1897 to 1902, has given a readable and complete account of work that has been done during the last 20 years in the creation of the new American Navy. His opportunities have been exceptional for tracing the history of that Navy, and his period of office covered the stirring events of the war with Spain, when the modern United States fleet received its baptism of fire and practically determined the issue. Remarkable vicissitudes have marked the history of the United States Navy during the past 40 years. When the Civil War broke out, that Navy was weak and inefficient. Little had been done towards the reconstruction rendered necessary in all navies by the introduction first of steam propulsion and subsequently of armor plating. This naval decadence was due to political causes and not to any loss of American skill in shipbuilding. The steam frigate Niagara, which was employed in carrying one half of the first transatlantic cable, was a proof to the contrary. But public interest was wanting in naval affairs, and no sufficient motive for increased expenditure on the Navy was found during a period of enormous internal development. When the depredations of the Alabama on American commerce and shipping, the necessity for establishing a blockade of the Confederate coast, and the conduct of naval operations against fortified ports in the southern states made action imperative, the world once more witnessed a wonderful example of the energy and resource of the American people. A great fleet sprang into being in an incredibly short time. It was, of course, to a great extent improvised, but it contained novel types, such as the Monitor, devised by Ericsson, the shallow draft ironclads built for service on the great rivers and coast waters, and various classes of unarmored cruisers, some of which were the progenitors of corresponding classes in other navies. Over 600 vessels were built or bought during the war, about one-third being of new construction, and many of these being left unfinished on the stocks when the Civil War ended. For a time it seemed possible that the United States would maintain its war fleet in a high rank amongst the navies of the world. But in the reaction consequent upon the enormous exertions and vast expenditure incurred in the Civil War, the Navy was once more neglected, vessels were permitted to decay on the stocks, and the naval force was allowed to diminish gradually but surely, no sufficient grants being made for its maintenance or extension. Now and again, efforts were made to remedy this state of affairs, but until 1883, no notable advance was effected. The cruisers Chicago, Boston, and Atlanta were then laid down. These ships, says Mr. Long, were the nucleus of the new American Navy. And it is interesting to know that in their design, an important part was played by two young naval constructors who had been trained in England as my pupils at the Royal Naval College. One of them, Rear Admiral Bowles, subsequently became chief constructor of the United States Navy, a position which he resigned recently after a distinguished official career. This new departure was based on the recommendation of an advisory board appointed in 1881, in which were included eminent naval officers, marine engineers, and naval constructors. The board reported that of the 61 unarmored cruisers then on the Navy list, only 32 were available for service, and it recommended the addition of 38 modern cruisers, as well as 30 smaller vessels for coast service, rams, gunboats, and torpedo craft. The immediate result of these recommendations was small, but the report was followed by others from naval committees of Congress, and public opinion in the United States was gradually influenced in favor of a strong navy. This policy has been since enforced by the remarkable writings of Captain Mahan and has been made permanent by the additions of oversea possessions to the territories of the United States as a result of the war with Spain. President Roosevelt has been throughout a strenuous advocate of the need for a strong navy, and his influence counts for much. Systematic development of the United States Navy really commenced under the administration of the late Mr. Whitney, who became Secretary of the Navy in 1885. His policy has been well described as embracing the reorganization of the administration of the Navy Department, the construction of a new Navy, including every improvement in offensive and defensive power, and the production of all materials used in building warships, as well as the construction of the vessels themselves within the United States. In short, his aim was not merely the development of the United States Navy, but of all home industries connected therewith. Mr. Whitney realized at the outset that it would be advantageous to acquire full particulars and working drawings of modern types of warships built or building in Europe. And after inquiry, he authorized the naval attaché in England to purchase designs for protected cruisers prepared by the writer during his connection with Messrs. Armstrong. These designs were acquired in 1885. One of them was that of the Japanese cruisers Naniwa and Takachiho, which were then approaching completion. The other was a new design for a larger and more powerful vessel, subsequently named the Baltimore, which took a prominent part in the Battle of Manila. Not long after, competitive designs for small battleships were invited by public advertisement, and the prize was awarded to a design prepared by the late Mr. William John, who was at that time the manager of the Barrows Shipbuilding Company. On the basis of this information, contracts were awarded to American firms for the construction of ships, which in their structural arrangements, machinery, armament, and equipment compared favorably with corresponding and contemporary classes in European navies. Even when thus limited, it was a bold undertaking to attempt to rival at one step in American shipyards results obtained in other navies after years of continuous effort which had furnished training for skilled workmen. Allowing for the fact that many British shipbuilders were engaged by American firms and that British experience in shipyard machinery and equipment was made available, it is impossible to leave unrecognized the remarkable success which was achieved by American manufacturers. From that time on, the Navy Department has relied upon American talent for the design as well as the construction of the war fleet. No doubt, the closest attention has been given to what has been done in Europe, and particularly in England, in the development of types of warships. In many classes, the influence of action taken by the British Admiralty on designs prepared in the United States has been both obvious and considerable. It is, however, equally true that in many particulars, American designers have made important new departures and shown the courage as well as the skill which is their traditional possession. The development in the United States of shipbuilding and engineering establishments of the first class has been a feature of the last 10 years. In regard to machinery and mechanical appliances for lifting weights or transporting materials, many novel arrangements have been introduced by American engineers, and some of their devices have been adopted in Great Britain. It is a notable fact that the new American Navy has for the most part been built by private firms, some of which have been practically created after orders have been secured for large and costly vessels. The dockyards belonging to the states have been chiefly devoted during this period of development to repairs of ships and machinery, but quite recently it has been decided to build a battleship of the largest class in New York Navy Yard in competition with sister ships building by private firms. Remarkable advances have been made also in the creation of manufactories for armor plating, shipbuilding materials, ordnance, and projectiles. The Harvey process of making armor was brought to a successful issue in the United States and has been the basis on which subsequent improvements have been made. Altogether, the energy and resource of the American people have been equal to the task imposed by the erection of the new Navy, but in certain departments, and particularly in regard to the production of armor and armaments, serious delays have occurred and the completion of ships has been hindered. It is not possible, nor is it desirable, to trace in detail the history of the new Navy. According to the latest official annual reports at the end of September 1903, there were 252 vessels fit for service, including those under repair. In addition, 45 vessels were under construction or authorized to be built. Of the completed vessels, 10 were battleships of the first class and one of the second class. The latter, Texas, cannot be regarded as fit for the line of battle under modern conditions. Two completed vessels are classed as armored cruisers, but the thickness and extent of their vertical armor on the sides hardly justify their ranking with modern armored cruisers in which hull protection is more highly developed. 14 protected and 3 unprotected cruisers of modern types make up the seagoing force now available. In addition, there are 10 vessels of the Monitor class, some of great age, and 1 armored ram, useful for coast defense, 16 torpedo boat destroyers, 29 torpedo boats, and 8 submarines constitute the torpedo flotilla. The submarines are of the Holland type, which was adopted also in the British Navy after successful trials had been made with it in the United States. There are also over 40 gunboats of small size and fighting power, and more than 50 auxiliary cruisers, colliers, supply and hospital ships, and converted yachts, most of which were added to the Navy by purchase during the recent war with Spain. Tugs and special non-combatant vessels make up the grand total of 252 ships fit for service. Vessels under construction or authorized to be built in September 1903 represented an enormous relative additional force, including 14 first-class battleships, 8 splendid armored cruisers, and 9 protected cruisers. 6 torpedo boats appear on this list, and 3 gunboats, but no torpedo boat destroyers or submarines. The first battleships worthy of that designation under present conditions were authorized in 1890. They are 3 in number and are known as the Oregon class. The Iowa, built 2 years later, is a distinct improvement upon them. In 1895, 2 others were authorized, the Kearsarge and Kentucky, in which the novel and much debated feature of double-storied turrets was introduced. In 1896, 3 vessels of the Alabama class were authorized. In 1898, the construction of 3 others was approved by Congress, including the Missouri, which has quite recently been the scene of a terrible disaster during target practice with her heavy turret guns.